Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 223 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what's the word, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about you?
Real well.
Yeah?
Real well. Excited about everything that we have out this weekend.
Yeah.
Last night, we dropped a new Patreon episode on Joseph Oberhansley.
Man, it's good.
Oh, it's a good one, man. This is a kid who murdered at 17, was let out, and then murdered again later in life. The press dubbed him the Cannibal Killer. So obviously that means we're getting into some gore factor.
Yeah. So don't be eating when you listen to it.
No, absolutely not. We have an episode out on True Crime All the Time about Edward Adams. Adams was an American spree killer and 1920s era gangster.
Yeah.
Killed a lot of people.
He did.
And at a certain point was determined that he just wasn't going back to prison.
No.
And he was going to kill whoever he had to kill in order to not have that happen. So before we get into this unsolved episode, let's give our shout outs. For Patreon, we had Jovan Ashley.
Hey, Jovan.
Brad DeZulma.
DeZulma.
Toya Bear.
What's up, Toya?
Brian Widmer.
Hey, Widmer.
Stacy Bowman.
What up, Bowman?
Allie Perry.
Hey, Allie.
Kate H.
Hey, Kate.
Just me.
Well, hi, just you.
Ashley McLaughlin.
Hey, McLaughlin.
Rebecca Brevard.
Hey, oh, that's a fun name. Brevard.
Brevard.
Yeah.
Mary Beth Moore.
Hey, Mary Beth.
Jan D.
What's up, Jan?
Christina Ferguson.
Hey, Christina.
She's part of that famous Ferguson clan.
Yeah, there's a lot of them out there.
Peach Pluff.
Hey, Peach Bluff.
Yep.
Okay.
The Smiling Mortician.
What up, Smiley?
And last but not least, Mandy Cotham Benavides.
Benavides.
Fun to say as well.
It is.
And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected our good friend Mary Beth Long.
Well, hey, Mary Beth.
So we appreciate the long-term Patreon support and the new support. We had some great PayPal donations from Julie Shantz,
May the Schwantz be with you.
Shannon McIntyre,
Hey, Shannon.
Leah Miller,
What up, Leah?
and Rosemary Overell.
Hey, Rosemary.
So thanks to all of you as well. All right, Gibbs, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
We're talking about the 1952 murders at Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. In 1952, two businessmen who decided to explore Crater Lake National Park near Klamath Falls, Oregon, went missing on July 19th. It took days of intense searching before their bodies were found a quarter-mile away from the road. The murders have some very odd circumstances about them, and they've remained unsolved for almost 70 years. You know, with that length of time, Gibbs, and we'll probably talk about it at some point in the episode, but, you know, most likely whoever killed these individuals is dead.
Yeah.
Given the length of time that has passed.
It's a long period of time.
But the question remains, who killed these two businessmen and why? The two individuals murdered were both General Motors executives. 56-year-old Albert Marston Jones from Concord, California, and 52-year-old Charles Patrick Culhane from Detroit, Michigan. The two men traveled to Crater Lake to enjoy a fishing holiday and were scheduled to meet up later with their wives at a local cabin. After they failed to arrive, their car was discovered on South Road, and it appeared that they had taken a shortcut through the Crater Lake National Park. Albert and Charles were found dead in the woods, some distance from their car. Both were bound, both were missing their shoes, and both were found to have been shot execution style at close range in the back of their heads. The murders sparked one of the most extensive investigations at the time. Crater Lake was a national park, which meant that the FBI had jurisdiction. No one has ever been successfully prosecuted and convicted of the double homicide. The case remains unsolved to this day. So, Gibbs, I think we need to take a look at the events that led up to the murders. We mentioned it. Charles Culhane was an executive with General Motors, and he was their newly appointed national sales manager for United Motor Service, a GM subsidiary known as AC Delco today.
Pretty big business.
Yeah, pretty big business, headquartered in Detroit. We used to have a plant here in Dayton that employed quite a few people. Culhane was on his first tour of the Western region operations and was accompanying Albert Jones, a regional sales manager, on his sales calls. Along with their wives, the two men decided to spend the weekend together exploring Crater Lake because they had the weekend free, and their next sales call was not scheduled until the following Monday morning.
Those business trips, man, that's what it's all about, you know? A little business, a little fun. In your case, back in the day, a little business, a little golf.
Yeah, a little business, a lot of fun, maybe.
Maybe.
Recreation.
Yeah.
But let's face it, it's the 50s. And, you know, yeah, business was business, but was it like it is today? Kind of almost for some of these executives 24/7, or at least, you know, every waking minute.
Yeah. Cell
phones, international dealings. And I don't want to romanticize the 50s too much, but I just think of it as, you know, kind of a little Pleasantville, a little slower paced, a little more free time, maybe, you know, home for dinner.
Well, I think when you left the office, right?
Well, that's one thing for sure. You know, the laptops and the telecommunication capabilities that exist today, along with cell phones.
Yeah.
You know, really, it's hard to separate the office from home.
Sure is.
And I feel like most of us are working more and more every year.
Yeah.
Whether it's mandated by the company or not, it's just like it's there. You know, you open up that laptop and you want to check emails. You want to see what's come in so that you can get a jump on things. It's kind of hard to put it all away. That's what I found.
Oh, it's definitely difficult to have that work-life balance.
Frank Eberline, the owner of a local auto supply chain, owned a cabin near Crater Lake on the Rogue River, and he offered it for these guys to use for the weekend. That weekend, the two men were supposed to go out on the lake with Frank and his teenage son, Alan, and Frank's general manager, John Vaughn. The two men had plans to meet Frank, Alan, and John on Saturday the 19th at Union Creek Resort to go fishing.
And there's even that back in the day. You could go ahead and use a potential client or a client's vacation home, cabin, or whatever.
With no ramifications.
Yeah, today, you imagine, hey, I'm going to, you're
fired.
Yeah.
You're fired. We can't do that. We got rules against all of that. According to a detailed analysis of the case compiled by the Crater Lake Institute, Albert Jones and Charles Culhane checked out of their motel at 11 a.m. that day, and they stopped for lunch before hitting the road. They were driving Jones's 1951 Pontiac through Crater Lake National Park on their way to meet with their wives at the cabin at Union Creek Resort. They entered the park at 1:05 p.m. on July 19th, 1952, according to park records. The car was later found around 2:50 p.m. that same day by Frank, his son Alan, and John. It was found about 3.5 miles away from the park's gates at an overlooked parking area for a trail called Annie Creek. The doors to the car were found wide open. The keys to the car were hanging from the ignition, but the men were nowhere to be found. When Charles and Albert didn't respond to their names being called out and searches along the trail didn't locate the two missing men, Frank notified the Crater Lake Park Ranger, Chief Ranger Lou Hallock. According to MailTribune.com, Lou Hallock's report states that an exhaustive search of Annie Creek Canyon failed to turn up any sign of the two men. His report stated, at this point, all concerned felt that the possibility of serious injury, accidental death, or becoming lost in the forest was becoming a very remote possibility. So, Gibbs, if you dissect there what he's saying, it makes complete sense, right? They've done an exhaustive search of the area around where this car was found. And we have to go back to the way it was found. Doors open, keys in the ignition. Okay. What is that telling an investigator?
It's certainly not a way you would typically abandon your car.
No, it almost seems like something happened in a hurry. You would think at the very least you get out of the car, you shut the doors.
Yeah.
So, to me, that's pointing to the fact that it was a quick escape from the car, so fast or so urgent that, hey, we don't even have time to shut the doors.
I mean, unless whatever you had for lunch was sneaking up on you pretty quick, and you're like, hey, I got to make a run to those bushes really quick.
Okay, I get your line of thinking. What are the chances that both of them have to exit the car at the exact same time to go to the bathroom?
I don't know, maybe they had that same
chili cheese burrito
exactly.
or something?
Yeah.
Okay. I would follow your logic if it was one person. Two people having it, come up on them as you describe it at the exact same time. I don't know. In a later interview with the Crater Lake Institute, Lou described the search for the two missing men. He said he initially thought the men might have fallen from the observatory point overlooking Annie Creek, or that they possibly had crossed the road and wandered into wild areas that were not well marked with trails, and they became lost.
So I get that. I can see that they're driving along this scenic route and they see this overlook and they're like, hey, let's check out that. What is that? Maybe they pull up, jump out of their car really quick to go up to the, the split rail fence or whatever's there to overlook it. And maybe they look over too far and fall in.
Yeah, I go back to my same argument though. If you said that happened to one person, okay, I think that's more believable than if it happened to two people at the same time. They both were looking over this kind of scenic observatory point and both fell over the railing. Again, I think the odds of that are pretty small.
Yeah.
But who knows? Because in an unsolved case, like we always say, can you discount anything? No, you kind of have to leave things open and everything on the table because we just don't know.
Yeah. And I think at this point, the Rangers are just scratching their heads trying to figure out where could these guys be.
And then after 24 hours, Lou began to suspect that maybe there was foul play involved. The problem is Rangers back in the 50s and 60s didn't have the authority to investigate crimes. That authority would not be given to them until the mid-1970s. Now, what they could do was organize search parties, and they did. They organized two different ones, one to search the observatory point and the other to search the woods across the road. So, they're basing this off of Lou's two theories.
Yeah.
Let's check each place. Rangers searched through the night. They even had food and bedrolls lowered into the canyon by helicopter for them. The searches lasted all day Saturday and Sunday, but there was no luck finding either of the two missing men.
You have to think that, their wives that came with them to have this relaxing getaway, at the cabin on the lake, their nerves are probably shot. Where are our husbands? What happened to them? They had to be freaking out.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they were, especially as, day turns to night and then, it gets into the next day. That panic's just going to escalate. It is. After extensive searches by rangers, police, and volunteers, the bodies of Charles and Albert were found on Monday, July 21st. The bodies were found about a quarter mile from the road in the woods in a section of Ponderosa Pines. It was discovered that they were both killed by shots to their heads. Albert Jones was found seated in front of a small tree, hunched forward, with a bullet hole in the back of his head. The entry wound on his head was surrounded by powder burns, which meant, Gibbs, that it was a fairly close shot. Maybe the muzzle was even touching his head.
Yeah.
Charles Culhane was found lying on the ground, about 5 feet away from Jones, and he had been shot in the side of the head while standing. Gunpowder burns also surrounded the entry wound on his head. Both men were wearing their business suits, although Jones had removed his shirt to remove his undershirt, and then he had put his dress shirt back on.
Which seems a little strange.
Well, maybe it was hot.
Yeah. I would just take off my dress shirt and just leave my undershirt on. That's me, though.
Yeah, but that's your normal attire anyway. So I could see why you would want to walk around in a white tank top.
Well,
That's basically probably what it was. Both men wore dentures, and both were found with their dentures in their shirt pockets, even though they typically wore them.
It's a little strange that they didn't have their dentures in. I don't know if they were full dentures or partial dentures, but why remove your dentures at all?
Well, and let's face it, how many people do when they're out and about? Normally dentures are removed before going to bed,
right?
And, put in a solution, and you put them in when you wake up the next morning. Most people wear their dentures all day long.
Yeah, I don't know too many people that would. Well, let me correct that. I don't know anybody that wouldn't have their dentures in during the day if they're going to be around people.
Yeah, I think that's just normal practice. Their hands were bound with rope. Both men's shoes were off, and they had been gagged with Jones's undershirt that had been torn into 2 strips, along with their neckties. Gibbs, what I found fairly strange was that the men's socks were not torn. They weren't even dirty, indicating they had not walked on the ground after their shoes were removed. And we don't know if they removed the shoes themselves or if they were removed by the killer or killers. We don't know that.
They just were removed.
Yeah, we just know they were off. But I think the fact that, their socks weren't dirty proved that they didn't really move or walk around after the shoes came off. Albert Jones's shoes were found nearby, but Charles's shoes have never been found. And I find that an interesting fact as well.
Yeah. Did they toss his shoes into the heavy brush and just were never found? Did they take his shoes?
Right. As a trophy?
Yeah, these actually fit me. I'll go ahead and take these. I mean, it's just strange.
The state police found 2 bullet casings at the scene, which indicated that the murder weapon was a .32 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Ballistics tests were performed on the bullet removed from Albert's head. Over the years, the Crater Lake Institute has reported that over 167 different guns have been fired for ballistics testing to compare with the gun used in the murders. But to this date, they haven't been able to find a match.
What's a lot of gun testing?
Yeah, 32, much more popular back in the 50s. 32 is not a popular caliber by any means today.
Yeah.
I don't even know I'm sure you can, but you won't see a lot of 32 caliber guns for sale. I never see them. I'm sure you can buy one, but I don't think there's a lot of manufacturers actually making them because there's really just no need for one. It's an outdated caliber that really serves no purpose. There are much better calibers today.
But back then, it was a fairly popular gun.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how popular, but obviously much more popular than it is today.
Yeah.
Between the two men, they were carrying $300 in cash.
Good chunk of change.
It is a lot of money to be carrying around in cash, but today we don't need to carry that much cash. We got debit cards, we've got, all of that. I think people in the 50s carried a lot more cash because they needed to.
They had to, right?
But
craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
How much would that be in today's dollars, Gibbs? It'd be thousands of dollars.
It'd be a few thousand for sure.
And that cash was taken, but their wallets were still in their pockets. Both men wore expensive watches, which were stolen. Their luggage, a camera, and their suit coats were on the back seat of the car, and none of it was touched. The state police allowed Frank Eberlein to drive Albert Jones's green Pontiac back to Klamath Falls, which I think you and I both found a little strange.
Yeah, I don't know if that would happen today. I wouldn't think it would.
I'm not sure it should have happened back then.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're in the middle of a murder investigation.
Right.
The men are no longer missing. They've been found murdered. So is the car part of the crime scene? I don't know.
I mean, could it hold some type of evidence?
Sure.
I mean,
and would you want someone to just drive it off? I would say no.
If anything, I think you'd want somebody on the investigative team to drive it away.
Well, in a perfect situation, you wouldn't want anybody to drive it.
Right.
You'd want to put it up on
Tow it out of there.
a hauler.
A holler.
Sounds like where my grandparents grew up in Kentucky, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, put it up on something and drive it away, like that.
Right.
That way nobody contaminates anything inside. But again, it's the 50s. I don't know what protocols were back then. I will say this, that would not happen today in a murder investigation. Sheriff Red Britton and several park rangers taped off the area, and they waited for the FBI to arrive with the coroner. And we kind of touched on it earlier, but the FBI was called in because the crime occurred in a national park, and they had jurisdiction. They got there within a couple of hours, but by the time they arrived, the state and local investigators had trampled through the crime scene. Even though it had been taped off, they basically destroyed some potential evidence that may have been left behind by the killer or killers. And
Yeah.
this is on top of letting Frank drive the car away.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know, investigation 101. Don't walk through the crime scene. But maybe back then they weren't aware of that, or they didn't have the experience or the know-how.
Yeah, my assumption is that those procedures would have been in place in many jurisdictions.
Right.
I don't know about what we're talking about here.
Yeah, maybe they didn't deal with a lot of murder cases.
Yes. But to say that that happened across the country, I would say no. I would say by the 50s, that was pretty common knowledge, and most police jurisdictions kind of had that in place.
But it certainly didn't help the case, right?
No, it couldn't have. There's no way. In 1952, rangers at Crater Lake National Park recorded the license plate number of every car entering the park. And the FBI spent years attempting to track down each tag owner to interview them about the murders. There were some individuals that were traced all the way to Europe. And while some of the owners of the cars were found and interviewed, no suspects were identified. No arrests were ever made in the case based solely on, this identification of the license plates. The medical examiner estimated the time of death for both men at 4 p.m. on July 19th. So, if we go back and we look at the timeline, Gibbs, if they entered the park at 1:05 p.m., then you have to ask the question, where were they for the 3 hours or so before it was estimated that they were killed?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good chunk of time that passed.
And we mentioned that their car was found at 2:50 p.m. So, that's interesting in and of itself because that's over an hour before the time of death. So you have to throw all of that into the mix. The autopsy showed that both men had been kicked in the groin, and it was noted that there was severe trauma. So, this wasn't, like a one kick. It seemed like it was repeated and it was pretty severe. Jones also had a fractured skull, which to investigators indicated that he possibly struggled with his attacker. It was reported that he was a former logger and not unaccustomed to a good fight.
Yeah, kind of a tough guy.
Yeah. A guy capable of putting up a fight because he'd probably been in a few scraps and he knew how to fight. According to the heraldandnews.com, in a letter to his daughter, Virginia, sent a month before his murder, Albert Jones wrote, "Things are worse than they have ever been. I do not see how they can get much worse." Virginia had no idea what her father was referring to in the letter, and it remains a mystery to this day.
It's an alarming and mysterious thing to say to your daughter.
Yeah, mysterious because she has no idea what he's talking about. But also alarming from the standpoint that, when you're saying things are as bad as they've ever been, and I don't see how they can get any worse.
Yeah.
Okay, that's dire talk. So that's going to be alarming to anyone, but especially your daughter. Coming from a father, it's almost like he's given up or he's at the end of his rope. There's a few things that you can kind of make from that.
I think most kids would say that they don't want to hear that from their parents, especially their dad. They're the solid person, the rock, the tough guy.
I think the other thing that you maybe can read into that is that there's some major trouble heading his way.
Yeah.
I said, okay, he's given up. He's at the end of his rope. But now that I think about it, maybe it's more that he's in trouble and there's someone after him, or, there's a storm brewing that he knows he's going to have to face or he's going to have to deal with.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be that as well. In the Journal of Alta, Julian Smith reported that someone driving a Chrysler two-door sedan with Oregon license plates and heading east towards Arizona tried to use Albert's stolen credit card at a gas station in Colton, California on August 2nd of that year. So, that's some great information.
Yeah.
Number one, how did somebody get his credit card?
Sure.
Unless they were involved in his murder. They were there at the crime scene. They're in California.
The thing I find interesting about the stolen credit card is it's not like they had the machines back then, right? You had those little books that you had to flip through and look at the numbers. So did they know it was stolen at that time? Or did they realize it was stolen later when MasterCard or Visa didn't credit the gas station's account because it was a stolen card that was used on the second, right? I wonder how long it took them to figure that out.
Yeah, my assumption is they didn't know, and it took some time for that information to come to light. I mean, it's really good information. The problem is no leads were ever developed from it. It didn't lead police to a viable suspect or anything like that.
No aha moment.
No. Also, during the investigation at the national park, you had thousands of tourists coming through, visiting the park and the lake. So I think that definitely added a layer of difficulty to this investigation, right? This wasn't somebody's home,
right,
that you could tape off and pretty easily keep unwanted people out of. This is a national park.
Yeah.
Now you could rope off, or tape off certain parts of it, but you're still going to have a ton of people coming and going.
New visitors every day.
According to heraldandnews.com, less than an hour after the bodies were found, Myrtle Weimer, owner of Weimer's Garage in Fort Klamath, took a call from a man at the Southern Oregon Pacific Railroad Depot in Medford. The caller identified himself as J.D. Harvey of 536 Plum Street in Medford and asked whether somebody could pick up his friend's car, which had been left at an overlook at the park with the keys in the ignition. The caller said his friend Jones was in the Sacred Heart Hospital in Medford and asked whether the garage could store the car until he was released. The woman who answered the phone immediately called the police after hanging up with this man, but officers responding to the train depot found that the mysterious caller was long gone. A railroad employee said he remembered seeing a man between the ages of 28 and 35, about 5'7" tall, with a slender build, sandy hair, and a receding hairline, using the phone around the time that this call was made. It was later discovered that the name J.D. Harvey and the address provided were both made up and did not exist in Southern Oregon. So, Gibbs, I think we've got to dive into theories about what might have occurred that day. Virginia Jones Cox, the daughter of Albert Jones, has always felt that the killing was an execution-style murder made to look like a robbery. Even though $300 and their expensive watches were stolen, their luggage, camera, and other belongings weren't touched. They weren't even searched. In 1990, she told the Mail Tribune in a letter, "I know who is responsible for my father's murder. I don't know the murderer's name, but I know the organization that arranged for my father's death. I just don't believe the story that this was a simple robbery. I have a feeling there was so much more to this that the people who killed them knew them." So very interesting.
Yeah.
Right? His daughter saying that she doesn't know exactly who killed her dad and Charles Culhane, but she knows the organization behind it. So this is one of the things that, really jumped out at me. You've got, two pretty big executives at a very big company. Could they be targeted for one reason or another? Yeah, sure, probably.
Yeah.
Now, what organization would be behind it? I have no idea.
But I get her point. I mean, it seems strange for this to be just called a robbery. Because why wouldn't you steal the items in the car? Why wouldn't you take their wallets out of their pockets?
Well, and at the very least, why would you not look through the items in the car?
Right.
Maybe you don't steal them, but how do you know whether something's worth stealing if you don't open up luggage, if you don't, search through everything? That part is strange.
And if you're going to rob them for their money and their watches, why not just shoot them where they stand? Why would you have to gag them and bind them and then kill them? Why not just shoot them where they stand and be done with it?
Well, here's another thought. Why murder them at all? If all you're after is $300 and 2 expensive watches, you can very easily do that without shooting these 2 men at point blank range in the back of the head.
Sure.
So, to that end, I understand exactly what she's saying, that this really doesn't look like a robbery. It looks more like an execution made to look like a robbery. And if you're going with the theory that this was some type of planned execution, then I think you have to ask the question, how did someone or more than one person know that these two men would be at Crater Lake at that time? Were they being followed? Because without that, how would they know?
That's true. How would they?
I don't know. That's why I asked the question. Another theory in this case is that the murderer was a person of interest to the police. This guy was a mountain man named George Duncan, who had killed a state police officer named Phil Loud near Prospect, Oregon, just a few days before the murders of Jones and Culhane.
Boy, this was an interesting case, too. I looked it up, and this guy, truly a mountain man, was upset because the state had people on his property, or what he thought was his property, surveying. He didn't like the surveyors being there, so he started chasing them off with his gun and shooting at them, but not hitting them. So 3 officers arrived on the scene, and when this officer walked up to talk to him, he shot him, just like that. Cold blood, because he didn't want the officer on his property, what he thought was his property.
Well, those mountain men, they don't want people on their property. They want to be left alone. Now, you can't be going around shooting police officers. Can't do that.
No.
But I could see where somebody would try to chase somebody off their land or what they thought was their land.
Yeah.
The problem with this theory is that it collapsed when investigators located several witnesses who saw George Duncan many miles away on the day of the killings. He was on foot and apparently had no access to a vehicle. He was eventually ruled out as a suspect in the murders of Jones and Culhane. Now, before police figured out that it was George Duncan who killed Officer Loud, they had 2 other suspects that they looked at for his murder and also looked at for the Crater Lake murders. When the state police pulled over 22-year-old Ray Shanklin and 21-year-old Ross Gallagher near the Crater Lake Park, they had 2 pistols, a crowbar, gloves, and $245 in cash under the car seat.
Interesting, right? Because we know that Albert and Charles had $300. We know that they were shot with a pistol. Could there be a tie in there?
Well, I think to police, these are definitely 2 individuals that they would want to take a look at. Not to mention the fact that at this point, they're still trying to figure out who killed their fellow officer.
Right.
So they're going to look at them for that as well.
And these weren't really nice young men either.
No, these were guys that had extensive police records. Gallagher had just finished a burglary sentence in Alameda County on June 20th, and he was arrested days later and spent a few weeks in the county jail. He was released on July 14th, just days before the murders. The FBI questioned both of these men, but they just couldn't put anything together, and they didn't pursue them any further. Frank Eberline had a theory that a local mechanic who worked near the national park for a construction contractor killed the 2 men. Frank told a local paper that the owner of the construction company said on the day of the murders, the mechanic was acting strangely. He was typically strapped for cash, but on that day, I guess Gibbs, he had a wad of cash, and he also had a new wristwatch.
Interesting.
But after that day, he never returned to the job site.
You know, what I find interesting up to this point is there's a lot of bad individuals in this neck of the woods.
Well, in every neck of the woods, right? Let's be
true.
honest.
Yeah.
Every story we do, and, we're astounded. I don't know why we continue to be astounded that every story we do, we end up finding these branches that lead us to these other, kind of bad people doing bad things around the same time, around the same area. And obviously that's why they come up in the story, right? Police are going to want to look at some of these people. Now, they can't make anything stick, or they find out that there's no way they could be involved based on eyewitnesses or alibis, but it still kind of blows you away.
It does. It really does.
That you find all of these people. And I go back to this guy, that was the construction contractor. Okay. Is it just a coincidence that the guy is always strapped for cash, and then one day he shows up on the job site flush,
right,
with a new wristwatch? Maybe
he had some luck at a poker game.
Right. Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe it's the reason why he never showed up again at the job site. And we don't know if police were ever able to track him down,
right,
and talk to him. We don't know.
He got out of Dodge.
Now, at a certain point, Gibbs, the FBI believed the murders might have been committed by a guy by the name of Jack Santos and his gang known as the Mountain Murder Mob.
The Mountain Murder Mob.
Well, that should strike a little fear into people.
Yeah.
The gang, whose motive was always robbery, but sometimes included killing their robbery victims, could have been responsible for the killings. Apparently, several gang members were staying at a motel in Medford at the time of the double murder. 3 members of the gang were convicted of other slayings in California, while FBI agents visited with the trio before their scheduled execution. None of the 3 admitted to killing or robbing Albert Jones and Charles Culhane. They were executed at San Quentin Prison in 1955.
Well, sometimes gangs keep quiet, right? They're not going to say if they did or didn't do anything anyway.
So first of all, I'm always amazed at how quickly things progressed back in time, right?
Yeah.
They were executed by 1955, so obviously very quickly. The second thing is, if you're heading to your execution, I guess you can make the argument either way. My thought is, why come out and say or admit that you did anything? Now, I think you could make the argument that some people might just want to clear their conscience, and nothing else can happen to them anyway. They're about ready to be put to death, so why not tell the police? I think if you're a gang member, though, your nature is to not talk to the police.
Well, I think you're right.
For the most part.
And I think you also have to be careful that if you do say something, that if there's any surviving gang members, they could take that out on your family members.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I said nothing else bad could happen to you, but you just brought up a great point, which is something bad could possibly happen to your family.
Right.
So there was a theory that the labor union put a hit out on Charles Culhane, and Albert Jones was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Charles Culhane had previously negotiated a pretty controversial union contract for General Motors, and some people believe that his death might have been retribution for his involvement during that contract negotiation. And Gibbs, I don't know if a lot of people put much stock into this theory. This one actually kind of really intrigues me. We said near the beginning of the episode that Culhane was kind of a bigwig, right, at General Motors. He was traveling with Albert Jones, who worked for him in some capacity, or was, a little bit lower on the ladder.
Right.
I mean, one of the first things that kind of jumped into my head when we were talking about this, and we said he was this big executive with GM, it just kind of hit me that, okay, labor, organized crime, that could have been a possibility.
Well, there was definitely a lot of that going on back in those days.
There was.
When you think of the Teamsters and
the
auto workers and all of those unions.
So, I mean, again, we have no idea, but I will say this is very intriguing to me. And the idea that the hit was meant for just Charles, but obviously if Albert was with him, they were not going to leave him alive. So that could be a real possibility if it went down that way. Local Klamath County Deputy Sheriff Alvy Youngblood, who lived in the area for 36 years and was the resident deputy there, firmly believed the murderers were Kenneth Moore and John Wesley Cole. Moore reportedly once bragged about being the killer, and he robbed, gagged, and shot to death 2 trappers in 1934.
So he's accustomed to murder. Doesn't have a problem doing it.
No, apparently not. He had done it before. Now, there's no evidence that either of these men were involved in the murders of Jones and Culhane, but Youngblood sure thought they were involved.
Sure did.
I think one of the problems when it comes to this pair is that they were both found frozen to death in 1962. So, it's unlikely that their involvement or lack of will ever be determined. I think one of the stranger theories was told by Lincoln Lenz to the Crater Lake Institute at the time of the murders. He was a student at the University of Oregon, and his summer job was driving the supply truck for the Crater Lake Lodge. On Saturday, July 19th, 1952, the day of the murders, he was headed for the lodge with a heavy load. The truck was an old Chevrolet. It didn't have a lot of power, so he was moving pretty slowly up the steep slope. He remembered 2 business-type guys in white shirts and ties, followed by 2 scruffy-looking guys walking south on the shoulder of the road. One of the business guys was making a hand signal, which he later said was in the form of a gun. So I'm thinking, finger pointing type gun representation. Yeah. He said around the turn beyond the observation point where Albert's car was found, a 1936 black Pontiac coupe was parked on the road's shoulder. Before he got to the lodge, the Pontiac pulled up alongside him, and the occupants in the car glared at him. He noted the license plate number of the car, and he wrote it in the dust on the dashboard of his truck. And then later that evening, he saw the 2 at the lodge, and the younger man stood in front of him and again glared at him. Lincoln said that the next morning, they blocked his way with their car for several minutes as he attempted to leave the lodge parking lot, and then again as he tried to leave the cafeteria parking lot after breakfast.
Sounds like they're trying to send him a message.
Something's going on. I mean, if that happened to me, at least there's going to be some words exchanged.
Yeah.
If I'm seeing the same people time and time again and they're messing with me.
Right. You got a problem with me? Yeah. I can see you doing that.
Now, if these guys are connected or mafia or something like that, then I'd be in trouble.
You'd be like, you got a problem with Gibby? I'll talk to him.
Then take it up with him. So when Lincoln was fueling up his truck at a service station, they pulled in, raised the hood of their car, and basically just watched him the whole time he was there. He said that one man had a leather belt with the name Ralph on it and a tattoo of a nude or bikini-clad female on his left forearm. I don't think I've ever seen someone with a nude tattoo on their forearm.
You mean like this one?
Except for you. And apparently this guy was missing a finger on his left hand. So, if you're putting out a description of someone, this guy's probably not going to be that hard to find.
Right.
He's missing a digit, and he has a nude woman tattooed on his forearm. I don't know how many people match that description.
It definitely limits the options.
Yeah. Lynn said he saw what he believed to be the same car in the town of Rogue River a week later. But when he looked for the license number that he had written on his dashboard, it was gone. It had been wiped clean. I think that is the big problem.
Sure.
With trying to record information in dust.
It's not going to stick around forever.
No. Somebody that is a little more into cleanliness is going to come along and maybe, wipe it down or something like that. So apparently he reported this to the authorities back then, but they didn't take him seriously. And Gibbs, like with everything in this case, it's interesting, but what do you make of it?
Right.
Who were these men? Were they, just guys that for whatever reason maybe had an issue with Lincoln? Maybe he had done something that he didn't realize. Maybe he'd cut them off. I don't know. I'm just kind of making stuff up. And they had nothing to do with the murders whatsoever. Or were these Union mob men? Or were these men part of the Mountain Murder Mob? Or were these men that had something to do with Albert's letter to his daughter? Because, to me, that's still a big mystery in this case.
It really is. Makes you wonder, did Albert have some type of debt? Maybe gambling? Maybe some other type of issue that required collection? I mean, you're still probably bouncing back to some type of organized crime, though. And who were these men that Lincoln saw walking on the highway? He saw 4 men, 2 with business-like clothes, and then these 2 scruffy guys behind them. What's that all about?
Just another mystery.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of them in this case. A former sheriff told the Herald newspaper that after inspecting the scene and the evidence, he was sure that the killers were just young punks, all excited and probably hopped up on beer and marijuana.
Sounds a little funny.
Well, it does, but it's the 50s, right?
Right.
It's like me saying I'm all hopped up on Mountain Dew. I'm going to come after you like a spider monkey. But it's the big difference between the 50s and where we are today.
Yeah.
That was a big deal back then. You were hopped up on beer and marijuana.
Yeah, when you say hopped up today, you're talking about a totally different type of substances.
The Herald concluded whoever committed the murders were either very stupid or very clever. And that's an interesting statement. It really is.
Yeah.
Because I think you could make that statement about a lot of killers.
You certainly could.
Who get away with it, right? When we're talking about these unsolved cases, that's a question. Were these killers so smart that everything they did led to the authorities never connecting them? Or were they just stupid and got away with it just because no connection could be made?
Right.
I think you could ask that question in just about every unsolved case.
Sure.
The surviving family members of the victims are still looking for closure. They're still looking for answers. The granddaughter of Albert Jones, Alice Sims, has made it her life's work to investigate the murder of her grandfather because it left such a mark on her family. Even though she was only a toddler at the time the murder occurred, her mother, Victoria, who was Albert's daughter, was 28 at the time of his murder. She passed away in 1993, never knowing who killed her father. The following year, Alice Sims decided that she would try to learn the truth. She said that she's doing it for her mother and her legacy. In 1995, she filed a Freedom of Information request for the FBI files on her grandfather's case. It took 5 years, but she received the documents in 2000. Gibbs, she read all 14,000 pages.
It's a lot of reading.
It is. And after reading all of that, she's more convinced than ever that Jack Santos and his gang are responsible for the murders. She stated that her conviction comes mostly from the way that Santos lies and trips himself up during his interviews. Alice Sims continues to petition the FBI to run DNA tests on any evidence that they may have in their possession. Hopefully the authorities continue to exhaust all efforts. This is a tough case, Gibbs. As we wrap up, we've talked about several theories as to who the killer or killers could be. But again, this case is almost 70 years old. And, at that point in any case, right, it becomes infinitely more difficult to solve. Now, the one thing that we haven't talked about is what evidence they have. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know if they have any. First of all, they let that guy drive off in the car.
Exactly.
And there could have been evidence there, but we don't know.
I mean, besides the bullet they took out of Albert's head.
Yes,
and
they have
the
that.
casings. What else is there?
Yeah. but they would have to find the gun to be able to match that up.
Yeah.
And even if they could solve it, you know, at this point, the killer or killers are most likely deceased.
Yeah.
If they are alive, they're probably in their 90s, at least. But that's it for the case of the 1952 unsolved murders at Crater Lake National Park of Charles Culhane and Albert Jones. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Gibby. This is Edith White, the one that emailed you, didn't want to hurt your feelings. Sorry, Gibby, but I'm Team Fergie. Just wanted to tell you, though, when people talk to you about your grammar, tell them what I tell them. When they say, where's your grandma at? I say, well, last time I checked, I thought she was on the front porch with Grandpa, but I could be wrong. And I love you guys' show. I'm just got over the episode of Richard Ramirez. I'm binging at work for 8 hours when I can. But you guys keep your own time ticking, and I'll keep mine ticking too. If you're looking for a story, try Breasia Terrell in Davenport, Iowa. She went missing last year in 2020. 10 months later, she was found, and she was only 11. So if you're looking for a story, there's one for you. Bye-bye.
All right, so we have a Team Fergie sighting, which is always exciting.
Yeah, we've got a lot of those.
Now, she was talking about Richard Ramirez, but this case that she's suggesting is an unsolved case. I actually looked it up, and it's something that we will probably cover sometime in the near future.
Or it sounds heartbreaking.
It is, yeah.
Hey guys, love the podcast. This is Brandon from Boston, Massachusetts. I was just listening to the Kenner cluster murders, and you're talking about why cocaine would have been used in all of the different murders. And it got me thinking that if you were strangling somebody that had cocaine in their system and had just used it, their heart rate would have been accelerated and they would have died out probably faster because the heart would have used up more oxygen in a shorter period of time. Anyways, just something that popped in my head, and I thought I'd give you guys a call. Love the podcast. Love the work you guys do. Stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Well, definitely thank you for the voicemail. And I like when people call in and give their theories and stuff like that, because you know, it means they're listening. They're playing amateur detective, and that's part of the lure, I think, of the unsolved.
Sure it is.
Hi, my name is Carrie, and I'm a really big fan of your guys. I'm originally in Ohio, and I've been North Dakota now. I just today got caught up on both TCAT and TCAT Unsolved, so I started binging criminology because I wanted to give that a shot too. But I really appreciate everything you guys do. I truly appreciate you guys getting me through the last 4 months that I've been binging a lot, because I started a little over a year ago listening to you guys, and I finally started binging again after my youngest brother passed away in March. And without you guys, I don't think I could make it through a work day or really make it through anything. You guys have really, truly helped me through a lot of that, and I appreciate it. Thank you, and stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Well, first of all, truly sorry to hear about your brother.
Yeah.
And Gibbs, you and I say it all the time, but you know, if the show helps anyone in any small way,
right,
that really means a lot to you and I.
It does.
It makes us feel, you know, kind of warm inside. Now, it's sometimes tough knowing that people are going through hard times, but if it's helping at all, that does make us feel good.
Yes, therapeutic for us as well.
Yeah, it is. When we're doing our thing and, you know, we're counseling each other, we're doing therapy back and forth a little.
All the time.
Hi, true crime all the time, guys. My name is Valerie Sikora. I live in Raton, New Mexico, in a rural area. And I'm an 80s child, and I know you guys are too. And I found your podcast on Audible, and it's the first podcast I've ever listened to. And I just want you to know I love it! Exclamation point. It is amazing. You guys are a great team. I love to hear you talk. I love the laugh, and, I am enjoying it so much. You have no idea. I have never really listened to podcasts, but, you guys are fantastic, and I appreciate what you do. And I'm just giving you a shout out here from New Mexico, and a thumbs up and a shay. You guys are kicking ass here in New Mexico. I really appreciate it, and keep up the good work. Love listening to you. Take care.
Man, some kudos from New Mexico.
I'm jazzed after that one.
You look jazzed.
I think we should go to New Mexico. I actually love Albuquerque. I've only been to Albuquerque.
Yeah.
But I loved Albuquerque. Any place where, it's like 90 degrees and then you can look up and see snow. That's pretty cool.
You like that, don't
Yeah,
you?
I thought that was pretty neat.
And the ocean's nowhere nearby.
No, nowhere. But we appreciate the voicemail. All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.